Thanks for tuning in to Product Chats. On today's episode, I talk with Urvish Khandwalla, who is the Director of Product at Arctic Wolf, and we talk about really understanding your customers, hiring for the sum of the parts, and upping your team's EQ. So hope you enjoy, and don't forget to leave us a review. AV, thanks so much for coming on today.
Hey, Kayla, thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So in a minute or less, tell us about yourself.
So I've been in the industry primarily for about little under 20 years. I moved from India to US to do my master's back in 2002 in telecommunications. And then I've worked across industries, but heavily focused on cybersecurity.
Yep.
I was privileged enough to ride the rocket ship at Akamai Technologies, where I spent a bulk of my career, and joined that company when they were about 500 people, given a little under 400 million in revenue. They had gone public by then, but they were on they were on a growth stage, right? Extreme growth stage, hypergrowth stage. And after 13 years when I left, they were about 8,500 people. So wow. I was fortunate enough to kind of ride a rocket ship and see the different directions that I keep joking that I worked for 4 different companies, worked in various functions, got a lot of leadership opportunities, and eventually took on my latest role at Arctic Wolf Technologies, where again, it's another rocket ship to get on, and I'm super excited to be there.
Awesome. And so with that, tell us about like your current role and what your day-to-day looks like.
Oh, absolutely. So at Arctic Wolf, we are on a mission to end cyber risk. We have a focus on being the leaders in security operations, right? So what we do essentially is support businesses when it comes to their security posture from a proactive standpoint, as well as from a reactive standpoint. Not all businesses can afford SOC, and not all people can maintain a SOC. And even if they can afford it, maintaining it takes a lot of operational discipline and the upkeep around it. And what Arctic Wolf has mastered is essentially establishing the platform, right, of ingesting trillions of log lines a day that translates into a few thousand incidents, right? So developing that platform and providing customers a reactive and proactive security. So what I'm responsible for at Arctic Wolf is primarily the proactive security arm of how do you maintain a strong security posture across your attack surface. Firstly, knowing what your attack surface is, and then beyond that, how do you assess it and proactively maintain a strong security hygiene so that you don't run into incidents and don't show up on the front pages of newspapers.
And so with that, right, it seems like obviously you know what like your mission is, but like how do you decide what you're building out? Because obviously there's like customers with different needs. What are you like, how are you prioritizing and focusing on specific areas of the product?
So a lot of it has to do with the overall corporate objectives, right? So the first place you start is trying to understand where are we going as an organization, right? What direction are we going? Understanding what the objectives are, whether it's depending on the size of the organization and the maturity curve, right? Objectives could be as close as 6 months, could be as far as 5 years or 10 years out, right? So understanding that and extrapolating and interpolating those allows you to kind of then decide. So first and foremost is knowing your corporate objectives, right? And what does the business care for? Where do you want to go? Second is looking at your product line. If I'm speaking for the product function, right? Looking at your product line and identifying that how do you align to those corporate objectives, right? If there are top line goals, for example, is there an opportunity for you to contribute to that? Or if there are bottom line goals, right? Reduce expenses, improve your profitability, etc. Can you contribute to those, right?
Yep.
Identifying those, and then of course looking at the competition in the market space, right? That okay, what are your competitors doing? I usually put the competitive, and this has been my function of my experience. I look at competition, but I don't try to emulate that, right? I'd rather figure out what needs are not being met and go after those, right? And if those matter to the customers or not, right? And a lot of times it reduces a lot of thrash, right? In terms of, the moment you get compared to another commodity product, you're like, which is cheaper? And then, you get into that fight. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad strategy. Coincidentally, my experiences have been that I've been in companies where the product development is fairly cutting edge. So at that point, you don't have a direct competitor to look at or a direct category to look at Gartner or Forrester and be able to say that, you know what, I play in this space and this is what I'm going to do. And in order for me to get there, I need to build a car which needs to have 4 wheels and a steering wheel and a Bluetooth system. Without sounding too cliche, Tesla or whatever it is, if you're trying to change the market, then at that point, you look at competition. Of course, you respect the competition. But then again, you got to chart your path, which is in alignment with the objectives of your organization.
And I think with that, right, it's about thinking more about your customer than your competition, right? Because your competition could be doing something and you could see that and it's a nice shiny object. But if you actually aren't thinking about what's aligned with your company objectives, then it's not going to work towards like the end goal and the growth, right?
And you bring up a very good point, because what ends up happening is that what I mentioned earlier is looking at the need, right? Looking at the customer need. You can focus on competition, sure. And a lot of times you can leverage competition because you unearth things that they have already, right? It's kind of like a second mover advantage. But more importantly, if you focus on the need of your customer, right? That at the end of the day, this is the outcome the customer is looking for. Customer doesn't care whether you're going from point A to point B, right? The customer cares about going from point A to point B, and that's what Uber focused on. Right. Yeah. And that's how they decided that, okay, customer doesn't give a crap about, or the customer doesn't give a crap about owning a fancy car and maintaining it and driving it and taking it. Sure, some of them do, but there are a lot of people in the urban areas who want to get from point A to point B and I can't get a taxi. So let me go. So yeah, I would say just to kind of, your corporate objectives is what you look at. You look at how your product line contributes to your corporate objectives. You look at your competition, but primary is looking at the customer needs, right? Because that's what's defining your product, right? Of why your product exists. It's because you're satisfying a certain customer need. And then, of course, you have look inside the company in terms of investments, right? That how much engineering investment do you have? How much marketing investment do you have? Do you make those? What levers do you pull and push? And everybody operates on constraints, right? So everybody has. Find me a product manager that doesn't operate on constraints, and I'll look at. So. But that's the way I would probably summarize that.
And I think with that, right, it's about like listening to the customer, aligning that. And sometimes I'm guessing that can be challenging because sometimes those don't always align. Like when you're listening to your customers sometimes want something and they're not seeing the bigger picture. So how do you like set those expectations with customers?
So a lot of it gets qualified by depending on who you're talking to, right? So a lot of times you got to focus on the persona. Right. So if I'm talking to a hands-on keyboard admin who's using my product, right, I have to be empathetic to his or her needs, right, in terms of what do they care about. Or if I'm talking to a CISO, for example, I got to be empathetic to their needs, right? Okay, what is the outcome that they're going after, right? If they care about that, hey, I don't want to show up on the front page of Wall Street Journal tomorrow, given all the ransomware campaigns that are going on. What do I do, Urvish? Then the conversation is all about, okay, you don't care about the how, you care about the what. Right? What needs to be done in order to get that done? But the guy who's doing it cares about the how, right? If I can go and tell the CISO that, hey, you can do these 7 steps, right, and get it done. But if those 7 steps translate into 5,000 steps for the admin, that's not being empathetic enough, right? So there's that balancing act between who you talk to in terms of identifying what needs to be done.
And I think with that, you mentioned that empathy, right? Understanding your different audiences, because you do serve like a vast range of audiences and being able to balance and speak to those, right? Like that CISO, you have to speak differently than to that like individual contributor. So it's interesting because a lot of people, they'll have like one main market, right? But it seems like with your product, you're having to balance these different personas and what they need and what they want.
So I'll give you a funny example. At Arclight, right, we're pretty industry agnostic for what we did at Arclight, right? With the security products, like you have distributed web application firewalls across the globe, or you have content delivery network that we stream content over, and it's fairly business agnostic, right? You talk to a CISO at IR retailer, right? Or you talk to a CISO at financial services, or even within financial services, whether it's insurance or retail banking, the conversations are very different. It's the same product I'm selling, right? It's the same product that I'm talking to them about. But so at one of my financial services customers, I was having this conversation with them regarding tuning their bot management solutions, right? Everybody knows that there are bots on the internet. They go from black to white and gray in between, depending on what the nature of that bot is. And Akamai was good at detecting these bots and treating them appropriately, right? Now, the first reaction is that, hey, customers are extremely sensitive to false positives or false negatives, right? False negatives rather, right? That you don't want malicious transaction to go through. And I was talking to this one financial services customer, and I said, hey, you want to tune it such a way that, you don't have, we were tuning it really hard to the point where there were no false negatives, but there were high false positives, right? And the customer was extremely sensitive to false positives because they were like, I cannot block $1 million transaction. I'm an asset management company. And if in your tuning, if I block a $3 million transaction, that's revenue lost to my business. I'd rather let an attack go through, right? And rather have the capacity to absorb that attack and deal with it after than blocking a $3 million transaction. And that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I always thought you got to stop bad traffic. And here you are telling me that it's okay as long as I don't block a legitimate transaction. So again, so depending on the segment, and one of the ways I kind of figured out, or at least it kind of came naturally, right? Or the naturally kind of spelled out was, either you look at it from an industry standpoint, because everybody in the same industry typically speak the same language and typically will have the same tech stack. They will have the same similar tech stack, similar value chain, similar workflows. So there is a very cohesive language that you can develop. If I'm talking to financial retail banking, for example, there's a very cohesive language that I know their problems, I know what they're working with. Or if I'm talking to a media company, right, they will have them. So if you look at it, one way is to look by verticals, one way is to look horizontally by the tier that you're talking at, right? That if I'm talking to a web admin, or if I'm talking to a security analyst, or if I'm talking to CISO, or if I'm talking to a director, mid-level manager whose responsibilities are such, and if you zero in on that, then you kind of empathize on, okay, what do they care about? And in the context of the product that you are responsible to develop, how do you impact their world? And that becomes a talk track. And that, again, are very similar, right? So you can either go top down or you can go horizontally across industries. Either track works.
And I think with that, right, it's like listening to the customer, right? Because you wouldn't have figured out what they wanted had you not gone out and talked to them. And I think that's like a skill set that we talk about. And this is kind of getting into like culture and mindset around hiring and growing teams. But if you don't, when I talk to a lot of product leaders, one of the main things that they talk about is skill set, right? And listening to your customers and being able to go out and rather than sitting in a room and hoping that you know what your customers want. Like if you didn't go out and talk to that customer, you would have never understood what they wanted. And maybe that changed the trajectory of what you built, right? Or how you built it.
One of my mentors, my previous company, actually handed me a book, and I make this a Christmas gift for my team every year, which not the same book though, but that one book with the Principles of Leadership by Abraham Lincoln. Right. And one of the chapters he talks about, in a war, you cannot run the troops by sitting at the back. You have to be in the front lines. You have to understand, you have to be in the field to know what's going on. Right. So and I've observed this trait in a lot of successful product leaders, right? That they, however, even if they're operating at a 50,000 foot view, right, strategically trying to make decisions, they still have a strong pulse on what a 2,000 foot view looks like. Right. They have a strong understanding of their customer. They have a strong understanding of the problems that the customers have. So till you don't get in the field, till you don't talk to customers, till you don't listen to the problems, you will not understand what you're building and why you're building. So I think you hit on a very important point that you and I spoke about this earlier, right? That the way to look at an individual is, there are three attributes, right? When I'm hiring for my team, the three attributes that I look for. One is the drive, right? The inherent drive, that is this person driven, motivated. And typically, because again, keep in mind that I've been building teams that were in hypergrowth stage companies, right? So I need that, and that's my number one. That's the fuel that fuels the team, right? That okay, is this person driven, whatnot. Second aspect is the IQ, right? The category that I define it as just the IQ, like how smart the person is, how much do they understand about their subject, how well do they understand their subject. And the third and most important, especially in product management, I believe, is EQ. Right, which is essentially understanding the question behind the question, right? Do you question why? Why is this being done? A lot of times when I was hiring sales engineers, I used to do this fun exercise with them. I would be like, hey, what phone do you use? And they'd be like, hey, I use an iPhone. I said, great, I use an Android. Let's role play 5 minutes, coming screen, switching to an iPhone. And 8 out of 10 candidates would go straight up into Apple's the most innovative company in the world. This is what they do. This is why. This is the biggest market share that they have. This is what. I'm like, okay, I listen to them. Great. That was their approach. And then there were these two guys who would say, great, what do you love about your Android? Tell me a little bit more about your Android. And he spent, of those 10 minutes, he spent 7 minutes listening to me about what do I care about from the Android. In the last 3 minutes, he needed just 3 minutes to sell me the features that iPhone did better that I cared about as a customer. Right? That's all they needed. They did not have to tell me why is it an innovative company or what the latest and greatest feature of iPhone is. What I care about, and those are the skills, from an EQ standpoint, the listening skills is what I value the most, and that's been pretty valuable in terms of when you're thinking about hiring individuals and when you're interacting with your customers. I think it's an important skill.
And so with that, right, the EQ and the IQ, what is the relationship you see? Do you see people with a lower IQ, higher EQ, lower IQ, and how do you help support those people who need to be strengthened in those areas?
There is a baseline for all, right? So when we were interviewed, there's a baseline that okay, drive has to be, and it was a very subjective scale. Like, I kind of developed this on my team, and my leaders started using these. It's a very subjective scale. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, yeah, this guy's an 8 on a drive. You got to be at least a 7 or an 8 to even be considered for, right? Once you know that the drive, and we can get into how we value that. But apart from that, the IQ and EQ, there's a baseline. Like, I've hired folks with, like, let's say we rank them on 9 out of 10 on IQ, but 5 out of 10 on EQ, for example. There's this one guy that comes to mind. And we knew that while we were interviewing him, that I needed that skill set on my team. I needed that IQ on my team, right? So when we're building a team, again, a sidebar, sum of parts is greater than the whole, something that I've kind of, if not, I would tattoo on myself, for lack of a better term. But I strongly believe in, right, that as far as teams go. And I needed that skill. I needed that IQ on my team. But I knew that for the role that I'm bringing him in as an engagement manager, his EQ was relatively low, right? He was very direct in terms of, you had to, a lot of the burden was on the other person to specifically ask him the question for the answer that he was looking for. This guy wouldn't be able to uncover or peel the onion. So we did a fun exercise with him. As we decided to hire him. We decided that, okay, in his onboarding, he's going to need some EQ development, right? And the fun exercise we did was, every time we would do these role play whiteboards in terms of, onboarding him and getting him familiar with the technologies and a pitch and whatnot, he would struggle with, the questions that come out in the room, right, where they're trying to ask. And a lot of times when you're in a customer facing role, you have to understand the why behind the why behind the why. Where's this guy coming from? Or what is he actually trying to solve? He's asking for this feature, but he doesn't really need that feature. He needs a problem solved, and you need to focus on that. And this guy was struggling to do that. So the fun exercise we did with him was, we told him that you need to go and learn. He was getting stuck in this whole technology thing that we were talking about. It's like, okay, let's just change the subject on you. You're going to go next week, you're going to come and do a whiteboard on how to make a perfect beef Wellington. Right? You are a waiter at a restaurant. You got to come, talk to your customer, understand the needs of beef Wellington, and you need to come back and present us the recipe of beef Wellington. He went, studied everything. He did that. When we moved away from technology, right? Now he had nowhere to hide, right? Because he was good at technology. So any question you asked him, he'd go to his strengths of technology and he would answer that. The answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't good enough, is what I was trying to get at. So now when we changed the subject on him and we started talking about beef Wellington, it dawned on him what he was missing, because he was so used to going to his strengths, right? And it dawned, oh yeah, I never thought about that. And then we started interacting. I said, dude, take the pressure off your mind. Let it be a conversation. If you were at a restaurant and if you're talking to a customer and the customer wants a beef Wellington a certain way, how would you engage that? Okay? First, you need to know how a beef Wellington is made. Great. Now you know the technical knowledge. Now you need to know what the customer's expectations are, right? That do they want it crisp? Do they want it this? Do they want to be done this way, that way? You need to understand that. And when the customer makes unreasonable demands, you know how the beef Wellington is done, and you have to do it in a gracious way and coach them to the point that it won't taste the way you're expecting it to by doing A, B, and C. So there is that EQ element of it. And trust me, in 2 years, he ended up winning the best engagement manager of the year. For I think 17. So that was a fun experiment that we did in terms of developing EQ.
So I think that goes to the piece of growing teams. And I know you grew your team at Akamai and you said you were at 500 to 8.5K people. So obviously your teams grew. And so I think you just talked about one piece of kind of coaching and allowing people to learn through their own experience, but supporting them and giving them a framework. So what other things do you do to support your teams as you're growing and as you've scaled?
As I said earlier, right, the sum of parts is greater than the whole. And I kind of bumped into that because at one point I was hiring pretty much identical people, right? That identical skill sets, identical. And I was just adding those just to realize, and that was just fine. That strategy worked fine for that team because there was a lot of volume of work where you needed that identical skill set, right? But as you grow the teams, you start realizing that you can do much more with it if you had complementing skills, right? And under the pretext of a collaborative culture, right? That if you have a team where everybody feels safe, where everybody feels part of a mission that is greater than themselves, right? The moment the team feels that, the moment the team sees that, is when they step in and when you drive that cohesive culture within the team, what your team can accomplish is far more exponential than hiring the same kind of people at the same time. So that was the lesson that I learned at one point. The other piece was, now as the leader on the team, there were three things that I always like. One is the engagement element, right? That I always do. For example, I'll do one-on-ones with my team on a recurring basis. Depending on the level, depending on the flavor, it would be either weekly or bi-weekly or once a month or whatever, depending on the level and whatnot. But people always have the ability to reach out to me, have the ability to reach out, open door policy to set up ad hoc one-on-ones, whatnot. There are three things that I tell each and every individual, right? That as a leader, I can contribute only in one of these three ways, and you decide how you want it. Right? One, if you don't know something that I can teach you, I will teach you, right? So that's number one. Number two, my job is to remove, if you don't need me to teach you anything, great. You know what you need to do. That's fantastic. Now, next thing I can contribute is remove roadblocks from your way for what you're trying to do, right? So whether it is, somebody on my team trying to get access to something that he's not figuring that out, or whether somebody on my team is trying to drive an initiative that is needs alignment, right, with the corporate objectives, then getting that buy-in, etc., that we believe adds value, etc. So one is, as I said, I'll teach you. If I don't, then I'll remove roadblocks. And third, and the most important one is, if you have those first two sorted, great, I'll stay out of your way. I always hire people that are smarter than me, because I know the fact that I know what my strengths are and I know what my weaknesses are, and I know the culture that I establish on my team. And I hire diverse set of folks, not only in terms of gender, race, etc., whatnot, but even in terms of skills, right? Even in terms of mental maps, even in terms of where they are in their personal lives, right? Because again, a 20-year-old has a very different requirements than a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old. Again, I'm talking about age, but stage of life is what I'm trying to get at. So those are the pieces that kind of come together really well. And then so that was one aspect of how we build a team. And the second thing is the culture. Let me talk maybe another minute on the culture aspect of it. A lot of folks, when they were in the hyper growth stage, right, and early in their career, 4 years, 5 years in career experience, etc., are looking for that growth, right? They're looking for the next level, or they're going in a direction, right, and that they want to accomplish that direction. And in order to do so, at Optima, when we were building these teams out, we quickly realized that we are hitting this career ladder issue, right? That okay, how do we source more talent in order to feed? So we kind of came up with a system of a career fodder system, right? That from this role, people move into this role, which is a career progression, and business was also growing at the same time. So there was need for that. But in order to do that, what it translated as far as the culture goes was, typically, once you take the role on, it typically takes you about 6 to 8 months to fully understand the role, right? To actually absorb, get your arms around the role. You have a co-pilot in your team that will support you as a mentor, will support you through the first 3 to 4 months. After that, you try flying solo, you make mistakes, etc. And then after that, about 8-9 months is when you truly start to fly solo, where you're confident about your role, you know what you're doing, you have a strong handle on how you're executing. Year 2 is all about contribution, right? So you're doing your role well, great. Year 2 is all about how are you contributing back to the community, right? So how are you either pick an area that you want to go specialize in and come back to the entire team and elevate the team's level in that area, or if there is an initiative that you want to run that benefits the team. That became part of our culture fabric, right? That how are you contributing back to the team? And the third year is typically where like you've taken on additional responsibilities and you've automatically changed your role, right? So if you were an engagement manager, you automatically became a senior engagement manager without anybody even saying that. How come you're not a senior already, right? Because you actively and mindfully work towards acquiring the skills, right, to move to that ladder. Or if you want to, whatever direction you wanted to go. And I keep telling my team that you want to be part of this team, great. If you want to be part of another team, I'll support you to go into that. Whatever your career aspirations are, my goal is to be the shepherd and kind of guide you and open up, as I said earlier, remove roadblocks, right? Can I figure out an initiative where this guy wants to do a little bit of marketing and wants to lean into marketing from services, he wants to go to marketing? Can I find initiative where there's an overlap, where he builds that network in there, right? As a leader, my job is to make sure that I take care of their careers. And that's the reason why people want to follow you, right? That because they know that A, you have their back, B, you have their interest at mind, irrespective of, your own self-interest of, how your team's going to operate, etc. So once you build that system, I think it becomes very easy to get more juice out of people willingly, like that they want to do it, not that you're forcing them to do it, but that they want to contribute to that mission. And there's a little bit of element of inspiration here, right? That they got to look up to something where they feel that they're connected to a purpose. Sorry, I went on too long in all directions, but I forgot your original question.
No, I think that was great. I think like about leading teams and supporting people. And I think at the end of the day, also, it comes down to trust, right? Trusting that you have, as a leader, have their best interests in mind and that you're also hiring for like their skill set, right? Of what they can bring to the team. And so I think that piece that you keep bringing up, like the sum of the parts, right? And because you bring in all these different people that have strengths, you're really allowing people to also learn from others because someone may have a weakness in one area and it allows them to see someone who's smarter than them. Or maybe I'm sure you're learning from your team all day because you're hiring people who are smarter than you.
So one of my product owners that I hired, he out of school, 3, 4 internships, extremely smart, right? First job at an article, extremely smart, and a little brash, right, in terms of managing stuff and whatnot. And he's like, I know it all and whatnot. I actually admire him a lot because I'm not like that. And I'm like, dude, where did this guy get the balls to challenge stuff? Like, I wish I had that. I had that. I think so. Sometimes he inspires me, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong with challenging. Okay, he doesn't know, and he's so confident in himself that he's like, yeah, okay, I don't know, and I'll learn, no problem, right? But
Yeah.
just the sheer, I don't come out of the gates like that, and I'm in awe of him, for that matter. I'll never tell him that, but I'm in awe of him in terms of like, dude, where do you get the balls to freaking challenge this? And this is great. And he's a gracious, once he gets a bigger picture, he's like, okay, understood. And he'll go back to the drawing board and do what needs to be done. But within the context of what he knows, extremely high on confidence, and I admire that in him. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, you're always learning from your teams, no doubt about it.
So with that, I know confidence is something that a leader needs. What is like one piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring product leader?
That's a great question. When I think of leadership and product management, one thing that I keep running into all the time, and I've learned this over years, is to our lives revolve around frameworks, right? Our lives revolve around how we classify. Because you're so central in the organization, you have to have a system in place where you can organize yourself, right? And what I've come to realize is the way I look at life and even my professional life for that matter in 3 buckets, right? So the first bucket is the bucket of things that I know, right? I know these things. I know this very well, either through experience or I've learned the skill or I've learned or I've read about it or whatever. There are things that I know. I'm very mindful of things that I know. Then there's a second bucket, which is things I know that I don't know, right? So this is the bucket where, hey, if tomorrow you come and ask me there, what is the 8843 form for your tax purposes? And I'm like, I know there is a form 8843, but I don't know what it is about. I got to go figure it out, right? So there is this second category of things that I know that I don't know. And the third category, which dawned on me like over the last 5, 6 years, is the things that you don't know, right? A lot of times, that's where you realize that, oh, this could have been possible this way too. I didn't even know that this actually matters, right? From there, the moment you have that realization from that bucket is where it goes automatically into bucket number 2, which is, okay, now I know that, the board of directors actually care about the corporate social responsibility, which I had no clue. All I thought about was that they care about its financials and is the company on track and what are we going to tell Wall Street, etc. So now you know about certain elements and you realize, okay, so what is it that they really care about when it comes to corporate social responsibility? Let me go find out. Now it's in my second bucket. And the day I find out, it automatically goes in my first bucket. Right? Now I know that this is what it is. So life is all about going from bucket number 3 to bucket number 2 to bucket number 2 to bucket number 1. Right? As you explore, whether it's in your professional life, in your personal life, you're learning about yourself, etc. For product managers, extremely important to understand your markets, right? There are things that you don't know, right? And that's where like analysts come in play. That's where mentors come in play. That's where people with experience come in play, right? Who actually guide you and say that, okay, you know what, in this space, you're thinking about this, but you don't even know that there are underlying forces around these that you haven't even thought about that you're going to run into, right? And the moment you have that realization, now in the second, so first, the third bucket, get a good mentor. Get a good mentor, get a good network, get a good board of directors for yourself or for your company for that matter, right? Those are your guys. Those mentors are going to tell you things that you don't know. In the second bucket, get good resources, right? Be part of think tanks, be part of, have resources like, whether it's books, whatever your learning style is, right? Go take classes, go learn about a subject, go read things. However you absorb information, focus on that. And bucket number 1 is things that you know, contribute back to the community. There are people for the first bucket, the stuff that you know in the first bucket is actually stuff for somebody in that third bucket. You can be a mentor. You can be a mentor to somebody and actually contribute back to the community and tell them that, okay, you know what? I know how to do customer segmentation really well. And there is some product manager struggling doing that. Okay, great. He didn't even know that there's a concept of a customer segmentation. Let me go give back to them. So that's the way I look at the three buckets of my professional and personal life. That's the way I kind of operate with them. I hope that kind of comes through.
And with that, right, it's using bucket one, and that by setting that up and being a mentor and helping other people, that sets you up for leadership because you're stepping up to the plate without someone asking you to.
Exactly.
So last question, where can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com. I mean, just look, my name's fairly unique. I'm probably the only Urvish Khandwalla that exists. So you can find me up on LinkedIn for sure. And other than that, I'm also on Instagram and Twitter with Telly Urvish as my handle, at Telly Urvish.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on today.
Awesome, Kayla. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Urvish for joining us on today's episode of Product Chats. If you want more product management resources, head to candy.io/blog, and we will see you next week.